What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Wednesday, April 30th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. 9-game MLB slate tonight. We had a 4-game afternoon slate as well. Hopefully going well for you if you played it. But 9 games tonight. Don't think we have any significant weather concerns to worry about on this one. It does start at 6:35 p.m. Eastern, so keep that in mind if you're playing. Don't forget to get your lineups in before lock. It does start earlier than usual. DraftKings is including the 4 games that start before 7:05 that sometimes they cut off the slate. So be sure to get those lineups in. But going to go through game by game as usual. Having a little bit of technical trouble with the SaberSim site. It keeps freezing for me and not being able to I can't see what I want to see. So might have some issues with that and kind of have to adjust on the fly there. But I will talk through each game, give you my thoughts on all the players, all the pitchers, all of that stuff as usual. Might be a little bit limited as far as what I can see from an ownership standpoint or from a player exposure standpoint because the page keeps freezing or just not showing what I wanted to show. So hopefully that starts to work during the show. But before we get into that, as a reminder, the Run the Sims projections are available now. You can sign up using the link in the description below. You get access to the projections that you see on the screen. These are fully detailed, fully downloadable. You can do whatever you want with them. We have every slate, individual games as well. You can see that you have all the fully detailed stats that come out of our sims that create the projections. So if you want to use them for prop betting, they're good for that as well. We will have prop tools rolling out in the future also. Those are not quite ready yet, but the data is there for you as well. And then in addition to the fully detailed projections, if you sign up for the full projections package, you do also get access to the browser extension. Works with Chrome and with Mozilla, and it overlays the projections directly onto your lineups page on DraftKings. That is coming shortly for underdog drafts as well. If you sign up for the full projections package, you get access to that extension as well. If you are only interested in the extension, that is available as well for $10 a month. You can just get the overlay. Great if you are hand building lineups, only playing a couple lineups. Doesn't necessarily make sense for you to subscribe to a full projections package. It would make it really difficult for you to still make money playing DFS, but you can sign up for just the overlay, still get access to the projections directly on the DraftKings screen. Great for late swapping lineups, adjusting lineups during the slate as well. Also use the promo code YUDA MLB, YOUDA MLB, and get 10% off your first month through May 31st. That is for either one of the MLB packages on the site. So excited to have these rolled out. Now, starting with the Yankees taking on the Orioles in Baltimore. High implied run total in this one. Plenty of ownership coming into this game, as you would expect. Cade Povich going for the Orioles. Carlos Carrasco is going for the Yankees. So neither of these pitchers are particularly good. Povich does certainly have some underlying talent, but he's been very hit or miss so far in his young career. And then Carlos Carrasco, of course, was good a decade ago, but not so good anymore. Probably not as bad as you're thinking he is. I know on a show the other day when I actually looked at his numbers, I was surprised that they weren't worse. But a 19% strikeout percentage, 4.3 xFIP for Carrasco since the start of last season. Just shy of a 20% strikeout percentage, 4.77 xFIP for Povich since the start of last season. Certainly neither of these pitchers inspire a lot of confidence in difficult matchups. Clearly, this Yankees offense is very, very good. You only have to go back to yesterday to be reminded of that when they hit 4 home runs in the first inning. The Orioles have objectively been the most unlucky, or at least one of the most unlucky offenses in baseball so far this year. There is still a lot of talent there. They've been hitting the ball hard. The gap between their expected stats and their actual stats is top 5 in pretty much any category as far as being unlucky. So still a very difficult matchup for Carrasco as well. 8% projected ownership coming into Povich, not much at all coming into Carrasco. Povich is showing up as optimal about 14 to 15% of the time for me. And the reason for that is that pitching on this slate just is not very good. If we back out of this game and just look at pitcher projections right now, you can see on the screen that Christopher Sanchez is the highest projected pitcher on the slate with 17 DraftKings points. And then there's just this whole mix of guys in here that are like 11 to 15 DraftKings points. And when you consider range of outcomes and volatility and all of that, those pitchers are just very, very, very similar. And so when you have a $5,500 salary coming into Cade Povich, it's not that he looks like a decent play because he's particularly likely to do well. He's not. The matchup sucks. But it's just that he doesn't project that much worse than a lot of the other options, and you're just paying less to get to him. So clearly the floor is non-existent, but it's non-existent for most pitchers on this slate, and there is still some ceiling there. He does strike out around 20% of hitters. So if you just want to punt SP2, I do think that's a viable option here with him at only $5,500. You can make the same sort of case for Carrasco at $5,700, but Povich is the one that projects considerably better and just looks better at that price tag. Offenses are going to be the spot that we feel the best about going to, though. Good park for power. Left-handed power has always been good here. And then again, they moved the left field wall in this season, so it is better for right-handed power than it has been in the last few years as well. Aaron Judge, not surprisingly, the highest fantasy point projection in this game offensively. 10.8 fantasy points, huge home run projection on him. None of that is surprising. If you can get to Judge, great. 17% projected ownership coming into him leads the way in this game. Then you get to a few Baltimore bats with Gunnar, Rutschman, Mullins, all getting 10 to 15% ownership. Goldschmidt, Grisham, Volpe, Laureano, all pulling like right around 10% ownership as well. Ryan O'Hearn, Jackson Holliday, Austin Wells getting some ownership between 5 and 10%. So really, no matter where you go in either one of these lineups, they are likely to be relatively popular. One thing that I did want to point out from a lineup standpoint, Jackson Holliday did get a lineup bump today. He is batting 6th at only 3,300. Obviously, he's had his ups and downs so far as a young major leaguer, but he does have speed. He does have power upside, especially in this park against a pitcher in Carrasco that doesn't miss a lot of bats. So I did want to point out the lineup bump there is just going to make him project a little bit better. 176 expected ISO allowed to lefties since the start of last season for Carrasco, 178 to righties. So no real power split between the two of them for Povich since last year. 176 expected ISO to righties, 188 to lefties. Does actually have a little bit higher strikeout percentage against righties at about 21%. High curveball usage, relatively high changeup usage. Those are two pitches that tend to play a little bit better against opposite-handed hitters. So not to say that, you should be avoiding right-handed hitters here, but you do see a little bit of reverse splits for Cade Povich. But overall, the offenses in this game just look good. I do think that the hitters are coming in a little bit over-owned in terms of optimal percentage versus ownership. But again, on a 9-game slate, that's not a deal breaker or anything like that. It's going to be easy enough to find ways to be contrarian elsewhere in your lineup while still getting to two of the higher upside stacks on this slate. One other thing I would mention from a lineup standpoint is that Ramon Laureano is getting the start against a right-handed pitcher and batting 5th for Baltimore. So that is going to drive up the value component of their stack as well. Just having a $2,300 hitter that does have some power hitting in the middle of this order right ahead of Jackson Holliday, who's only 3,300. So you have, a top of the order that is relatively expensive with Mullins, Henderson, Rutschman. But then salaries do drop off with O'Hearn batting cleanup at 4,300, Laureano batting 5th at 2,300, Holliday hitting 6th at 3,300. It's actually a pretty cheap stack for a team that has a near 5 implied run total at home against Carlos Carrasco. So that is something to keep in mind with Baltimore as well. Cardinals are taking on the Reds in Cincinnati, second game of a doubleheader. Steven Matz is going for the Cardinals. Chase Petty is going for the Reds. Matz projects for not many fantasy points, and neither does Petty. Petty is $6,600 on DraftKings. Matz is $7,800. 7.5% projected ownership coming in to Petty, about 3% coming into Matz, both with an optimal percentage in the 3 to 4% range. Neither of them look like priorities on this slate. The park is obviously not good for pitching, one of the more favorable hitters parks in baseball. Chase Petty is a 22-year-old right-hander making his major league debut. 5 starts at AAA this season for the Reds, 23 innings pitched, 27% strikeout percentage, does not project for big strikeout numbers in the major leagues, though. Steamer has him with an 18.8% strikeout percentage. The Bat has him at 20%. That's the high mark of the publicly available projection models on Fangraphs. You can see here that we have him projected for just over 3 strikeouts here. So neither of these guys look overly appealing, especially in this park. Offensively, nice park upgrade here for the Cardinals. Say what you want about their offense, but it is nice for them getting out of Busch Stadium, getting into Great American Ballpark. Not a ton of ownership coming in here. 5 to 10% ownership to a lot of guys. Brendan Donovan, Matt McLain, Lars Nootbaar, Wilson Contreras, Jordan Walker, all in that range. But I do think they're going a little bit under-owned, or there are a lot of players in this game, rather, going a little bit under-owned. Brendan Donovan showing up as optimal 11 to 12% of the time. He has second base and outfield eligibility, so it's pretty easy to get him into lineups. He's 4,500, batting third, so that looks good with the park upgrade going up against Petty, making his major league debut. I do like that. Lars Nootbaar leading off at 4,500, getting about 7% ownership, 10.5% chance of being in the optimal lineup. So I like the lefties at the top here. Mason Wynn batting second, nice lineup bump for him. He's only 3,200, so you can get a value bat there at shortstop that does have some stolen base upside, does have a little bit of pop as well. If we scroll over to the right here, on the projections page, you can see not a huge stolen base projection for Wynn, but will run a little bit. The only really high stolen base projection for the Cards is Victor Scott. He is hitting toward the bottom of the order, but if he is on base, you can expect him to run. But I do think that the top of the order for the Cards is a little bit underrepresented right now in ownership projections. On the Cincinnati side, going up against Mats, I'm pretty much in line with the field. Matt McLain leading the way at 8% ownership. His salary has dropped pretty quickly. He hasn't been hitting very well of late, but we do know he's a talented hitter in a good park. Decent matchup here against Mats. Has the platoon advantage. Mats also historically not very good at holding runners. 170 expected ISO allowed to right-handed hitters. Sorry, that's Michaelis. I need to put Mats in. 186 expected ISO to right-handed hitters since the start of last season for Mats, just an 18% strikeout percentage. So I do like Matt McLain here. If you can get to Elly De La Cruz at 6K, he's obviously going to look really good as well. You get him on the weaker side of the plate batting right-handed, but huge stolen base projection. As I mentioned, Mats throughout his career has had some issues with that, and you can see if you sort by stolen base projection here, De La Cruz with a massive 0.38 stolen base projection. So if he does get on base, very likely to be looking to run here. So neither team looks like a true priority here, but I do think that the top of the order for the Cards is going a little bit under-owned in tournaments. And then the Reds, particularly McLain and De La Cruz, look like pretty solid high upside options here at modest ownership against Mats as well. Cubs taking on the Pirates in Pittsburgh. So not a great park for offense, but still around a 5 to 5.5 implied run total for the Cubs going up against Carmen Mlodzinski. That one is a mouthful. Mlodzinski not getting any ownership at 5K, showing up as optimal about 3% of the time. So in that Carlos Carrasco bucket where even though they're really cheap, they just aren't projected for enough fantasy points to really get much traction. Matthew Boyd on the other side has a 28% ownership projection at 8,400, showing up as optimal about half that often at 14%. I think he's okay. Like the matchup's good. The park's good. You can see the fantasy point projection is fine. But again, he's just in this bucket, very large bucket of pitchers that just project for like 11 to 15 fantasy points today. And so that does just flatten out the optimal percentage for him and does make him look like he's going a little bit over-owned. That being said, he does have solid strikeout stuff going back to the start of last season, 24% strikeout percentage, 4.17 xFIP, getting the park upgrade here in Pittsburgh. So I think he's a solid pitching option. I don't have any real issues with him other than I do think that the ownership is a little bit higher than it should be. The Cubs offense looks good. Einsteinium said Cubs are inevitable. And yeah, this offense has just raked all season long. It seemed like they came through again yesterday. I played them at low ownership on the turbo slate. They put up a really good game. It just didn't matter because the Yankees hit 100 home runs at 60% owned across the board in small field stuff. But the Cubs have just hit really well all season. And it, of course, is led by Kyle Tucker. He is expensive at $6,200, no doubt about that. But he is really, really, really good. Mlodzinski has been solid at limiting power to lefties and righties for that matter. 107 expected ISO to lefties, 129 to righties. But again, Kyle Tucker is just really good, getting 14% ownership, showing up as optimal about 12 to 13% of the time, despite the expensive $6,200 price tag. Ian Happ is affordable, leading off at 4,300. Switch hitter, getting 13% ownership, which is right in line with his optimal percentage. John Birdie is batting ninth, but he is 3K with MPE, getting 13% ownership, which again is pretty much in line with his optimal percentage. So 10 to 15% ownership for most of the relevant Cubs bats. Tucker, Happ, Birdie, Suzuki, Swanson, Horner, Bush, all falling in that range. And I think it is well deserved here. You can get to Carson Kelly and Pete Crow Armstrong as well. I think that Crow Armstrong is actually probably, at least with the way ownership projections look right now, the most under-owned hitter on the Cubs, along with Carson Kelly, who is batting fifth. Kelly is $5K, so it's going to be tough to want to pay that salary for him. But it is a way that you can differentiate within these Cubs stacks, mix in Pete Crow Armstrong, mix in Carson Kelly, and offset some of that ownership that is going to come in elsewhere. On the other side, going up against Boyd, I do think the Pirates are going under-owned. They are a relatively low probability stack. They have about a 4 implied run total here, but you do get negative correlation against Boyd, who, like I said, I do think is going a little bit over-owned here. And you do have some talent in the Pirates lineup. You know, it might not be a ton of talent, but at the top, O'Neal Cruz, granted lefty, you know, he is somebody that will look to steal bases. 0.21 stolen base projection is relatively low for him, but it's still, you know, not nothing. He still may look to run here against Boyd. He is very expensive. That should keep the ownership down, only projected for about 2% ownership. Joey Bart, Andrew McCutchen, Brian Hayes, Brian Reynolds, this whole lineup is projected for virtually no ownership. So it's not that I think they're super likely to come through, but if they do, you're knocking off a pitcher that is going to be rostered by about a quarter of the field. And then you're also getting hitters that individually are, you know, 2-3% owned across the board. So looking to just the upside of O'Neal Cruz, Joey Bart as a $3,900 catcher batting cleanup, Andrew McCutchen with the platoon advantage, Brian Hayes, Brian Reynolds. I do think that if you're playing a lot of lineups in large field tournaments, it is a stack that makes sense getting to. Not sure that I would get to them in small field, although I still may, because Boyd's ownership probably ends up being even higher there as well. Washington taking on the Phillies in Philadelphia. Christopher Sanchez, I mentioned before, the highest projected pitcher on the slate. He has shown good strikeout stuff so far this season, going back to the start of last season, a 21.5% strikeout percentage, but we have seen his stuff look really good so far this year. He left the start recently with an injury, but it looks like it was precautionary. So he looks good here, getting 40% ownership at 8,200, showing up as optimal about 30% of the time. So slightly over-owned, but as a reminder, you're not looking to make the actual optimal perfect lineup in MLB. And whenever you see a discrepancy like this, where it's a 40% owned pitcher with a 30% chance of being optimal, to me, the main takeaway is that he is in the perfect lineup 1 out of 3 times. That is very high. He stands out on this slate. 3.5 implied run total for the Nats is very low. So happy to get to Christopher Sanchez here. So far this season, he has struck out righties 29% of the time. He has struck out lefties 31% of the time. Very limited sample, only 92 pitches thrown to lefties, 339 thrown to righties, but he's not allowing any power. He has the high strikeout percentage, sub 300 expected WOBA against both sides of the plate, 16% swinging strike percentage against righties, where he has thrown that changeup 43% of the time. That pitch alone has a 28% swinging strike percentage. So he is somebody that you expect to be able to strike righties out at a very high clip because of an excellent changeup. The Nats are running a lineup out there that is pretty balanced. 5 right-handed hitters, 4 left-handed hitters. You actually have 3 lefties in the top 4 for the Nats with CJ Abrams, James Wood, and Nathaniel Lowe. But as I mentioned, in a limited sample, Sanchez has still been able to strike lefties out this year. Going back to last year, 22% strikeout percentage, sub 100 expected ISO. So he's not one of these pitchers that is really good against opposite-handed hitters because of his changeup, but can't get out same-handed hitters. He is still very capable of getting them out. He looks very, very good here. Jake Irvin on the other side looks like an interesting tournament play as well. $7,700 price tag, only projected for about 5% ownership at $7,700. And I think this is just going to be a theme throughout the show. You shouldn't feel very good about getting to Jake Irvin. This Phillies lineup is certainly potent. They have a lot of good hitters. They have a high implied run total. The park is good for offense. All of that is true. But you just have Jake Irvin thrown in this mix of pitchers that project in that 11 to 15 fantasy point range. And the field is going to choose the ones that are projected, 1.5, 2 points higher, even though in a 1-game sample, that difference is not very meaningful. So it just creates a situation where even though Matthew Boyd is going to beat Jake Irvin more than 50% of the time, probably something like 60-40 or maybe even 65-35, you're going to get an ownership split where it's like 5 or 6 to 1 in favor of Matthew Boyd. So that is something that you can look to take advantage of in large field tournaments, especially if you do want to go to a more popular stack, take on some hitter ownership. I think this is a good slate to look to be different at pitcher because so many of these pitchers do look very, very similar. Irvin is one of those guys. Offensively, Philly side is going to look better than the Nat side, obviously, given the matchups. I think the ownership coming into the Phillies is pretty much where it should be, about 8 to 10% coming into Harper, 6% to Schwarber, 7 to Turner, 8 to Stott, 8 to Real Muto. Those numbers are all pretty much in line with their chances of being optimal. Irvin, so far since last season, has allowed a 153 expected ISO to righties, so he's been pretty good there. 211 expected ISO to lefties, and his trouble with lefties has continued so far this year from a power standpoint. Now, he has struck lefties out 24% of the time this year, so that is an uptick in strikeout stuff. He's throwing his curveball against them a bit more. He's throwing his changeup 18% of the time this year. He only threw it 6% of the time last year. So you have seen him make some changes that are likely to improve his results against opposite-handed hitters, and it has led to an increase in strikeout percentage, but he has still allowed a 212 actual ISO and a 230 expected ISO. So Bryce Harper, Kyle Schwarber, Bryson Stott from the left side, still a very high upside power matchup for them here. Righties, 196 expected ISO against him so far this year, 153 since the start of last year, like I said. So certainly can mix in some Trey Turner, some Real Muto, Castellanos as parts of this stack. But I do like the home run, the power matchup for Bryce Harper, for Schwarber, to a lesser extent for Stott. If we sort by home run projection here, you can see a very high home run projection for Kyle Schwarber, very high for Bryce Harper, and then relatively high for Kepler from the left side, Stott from the left side. For Kepler, we actually have a pretty low pinch hit percentage on him here as well, which is good to see. Going to pull up the Nats bullpen just to see what the lefties look like there, since we do like the platoon advantage that they have against Irvin. You have two left-handed relievers in the bullpen for the Nats, Colin Poche and Jose Ferrer. Jose Ferrer pitched yesterday through 12 pitches. I assume he's available today, but he is a back-end guy. So if the Phillies are playing from ahead, you're probably not seeing him come into the game. Poche pitched on Sunday and Monday, did not pitch yesterday. So probably available today, but maybe not. I assume that he will be, though. So you kind of have like 1.5 lefties in the bullpen here for the Nats. Overall, looks like a good spot for these left-handed bats on the Phillies. KC taking on Tampa Bay in Tampa Bay. Nice park upgrade as far as power goes for Kansas City. We know that Kauffman Stadium is a good park for offense overall, but not for hitting home runs. Drew Rasmussen is pitching for the Rays. Noah Cameron is pitching for the Royals. 8% projected ownership coming into Cameron at 4K flat. He has about a 9% chance of being optimal. You are getting a minimum salary option. He is a 25-year-old lefty. He is making his major league debut. 5 starts for him at AAA this year. 22 and a third innings pitched. Projects for around a 22% strikeout percentage in most of the models on Fangraphs. The bat actually has him a little bit higher at 24%. We have him projected to go just shy of 5 innings here. Projects for over 3x his salary. So good value option, no doubt about it. Does look like he has some quality strikeout stuff here as well. But you do have a 4.5 to 5 implied run total on the Rays in this park. So it's certainly not a safe matchup. But again, if you want to pay down for pitching, there's nothing wrong with going to a 4K Noah Cameron. He certainly should be more expensive than that. On the other side, $8,800 price tag for Rasmussen, 19% projected ownership, 21 to 22% chance of being optimal. He is one of the higher projected pitchers on this slate. Not a great strikeout matchup, but as a reminder, the projection for Kansas City strikeouts does increase a little bit with them getting on the road. Kauffman Stadium is the most difficult place for pitchers to get strikeouts other than Coors Field. So you see the strikeout projection increase a bit, but it's still going to be a low strikeout projection overall. or a bad strikeout, below average strikeout matchup overall. You can see about a 5K projection for Rasmussen here, projected to go about 5 1/3 innings. So he looks good at 8,800. He's somebody where on a lot of slates, you probably wouldn't be too excited about getting to him in this matchup at that price tag. But on this slate where pitching certainly leaves a lot to be desired, he looks pretty good. 26.6% K percentage since the start of last season is the highest of any pitcher on this slate. 3.09 xFIP is very good. He's only walked about 5% of hitters. He doesn't really give up any power. So all of that looks good. Offensively, I would expect the Tampa side to be getting more ownership here. 15% projected ownership coming into Yandy Diaz. That is the highest projected ownership in the game for a hitter. Again, he does have the platoon advantage here. He is only 3,900. He has first base and third base eligibility. He's batting second. He looks like a good value option. Then you get to Danny Jansen, Chandler Simpson, who's leading off at 3,500. Jansen hitting sixth at 3,300. Christopher Morel batting third at 3K or 4K rather. These guys all like 5 to 10% owned, along with Junior Caminero, Jose Caballero. So I do think that the Rays are going a little bit over-owned, given that they project really well on a point per dollar basis. And they certainly have plenty of upside here against a pitcher making his major league debut. But what does tend to happen when you get a team that is just underpriced for their talent level, like the Rays are, is you will tend to see ownership just get a little bit higher than it should be relative to optimal percentages, because people are reliant on optimizers and all of that. And if you're using an like just a straight optimizer, it's just going to kick a lot of these Tampa Bay bats into your lineup because they do project as good values. But you have to remember that there's so much volatility in hitting, and the way that scoring works, like their price sensitivity certainly is a thing. You know, the fact that you can stack this Tampa Bay team for pretty close to free does make the upside of your total lineup better, because you can get to good pitching and good hitting. But at the same time, it's not like a sport like basketball where if you have a hitter that's $500 underpriced, you should just be jamming him in everywhere, because you're not going to be able to find guys with comparable range of outcomes in his price range. Everybody in these guys' price ranges still can go for 14, 15, 20 fantasy points any given game. So I do think the ownership's a little high on Tampa, but they do look like a good point per dollar projected team. They're certainly a good team to use as filler if you have a lower owned 5-man stack, or if you want to go to a Tampa Bay stack, a Tampa Bay 5-man. I think that's a spot where maybe you do look to like a Jake Irvin instead of a Matthew Boyd, for example, to fill out your lineup. I think that's a perfectly fine way to go as well. Bobby Witt Jr., Salvador Perez, both looking a bit under-owned to me. Again, the matchup against Rasmussen is not great, but you do have first base and catcher eligibility on Perez at 4,200. So you're just going to be able to get catcher upside there at about 5% ownership. And then Bobby Witt getting 6% ownership, 12% chance of being optimal. It's Bobby Witt. I don't think you really have to say a ton there. We do have him with a very high stolen base projection, along with Maikel Garcia and Chandler Simpson. So that is driving up the projection as well. Never going to be anything wrong with getting to a low-owned Bobby Witt Jr. in large field tournaments. The upside for him is obviously massive, even in a tough matchup. Boston is taking on Toronto in Toronto after hitting 1 million home runs yesterday against Bowden Francis. For the where'd this game go? For the Blue Jays, Yariel Rodriguez on the mound, Lucas Giolito going for the Red Sox. We do not have Rodriguez projected to work very deep into this game at all. He can pretty safely be ignored. And we don't have Giolito working very deep into it either. Shy of 5 innings there at $7,500. Also a brutal strikeout matchup for him against this Toronto team. Eric Lauer, I think, expected to be the long guy, the follower behind Rodriguez. I don't think that you really need to worry about getting to him against the Red Sox either, but I will mention that. Yeah, he looks like the probable long guy at 6K. Again, I don't think you need to get there. And Giolito, with arguably the worst strikeout matchup going up against this Toronto team, not very interested in getting to him either. He is making his first start of the season. He made 5 rehab starts at AAA. He threw 85 pitches in his most recent outing. So I don't expect him to be super limited here. I assume they'll have a little bit shorter leash than usual just because it is his first start of the season. But the thing that really stands out and makes him not look super appealing is that this Toronto lineup, or roster rather, against right-handed pitching since the start of last season has the second lowest strikeout percentage, basically tied with San Diego for the lowest at just below 17.5%. So it's not really a spot where I feel the need to get to Giolito in his first start of the season. I do think he is technically going under-owned at no ownership with about a 6% chance of being optimal, but I think that there's other spots I would rather get to. Offensively, you do have a high total in this game, and I do think bats look pretty good, as does the field. Alex Bregman leading the way with about a 12% ownership projection. Jarren Duran, Rafael Devers, Bichette, Kirk, Santander, Story, Guerrero, Springer, all in this like 7 to 10% range as well. So the field is pretty likely to just be getting to both sides of this game offensively, and I think that they should. Obviously, you have plenty of volatility in this matchup. We don't know what we're going to get from Giolito, one, because it's his first start of the season, and two, because you just don't really know what you're going to get from Lucas Giolito over the last couple of years anyway. Eric Lauer did not pitch in the majors last year. You go back to 2023, he threw 698 pitches to righties. He threw 146 to lefties. He allowed a 297 expected ISO to righties. That is going to set up nicely for Alex Bregman once Lauer comes into the game. It's going to set up nicely for Trevor Story. Duran, Devers from the left side. Lauer has not allowed nearly as much power as you would expect, but those guys do still give you power upside. Duran gives you stolen base upside as well. But I do like Alex Bregman quite a bit here. I think that Devers, Story, Duran, Campbell, this whole Red Sox team looks pretty good in this park. I think that 5 to 10% ownership for most of them is certainly reasonable. And I think that in a couple of cases, Bregman and Story in particular, they're probably going a little bit under-owned. On the Toronto side against Giolito, the most ownership is to Bichette at 9%. Kirk also coming in at about 9% as a cheap catching option, batting sixth at 3K. I think they're going a little bit over-owned there, but nothing crazy. 5 to 7% chances of being optimal for Bichette, Kirk, Guerrero, Springer, Santander, Jimenez. So secondary stack for Toronto. I would prefer getting to Boston over the Blue Jays, but I do think that they are pretty similar. My favorite bats in the game, though, are Alex Bregman and Trevor Story. I think you can throw Rafael Devers in there as well. Arizona taking on the Mets in Citi Field. This game had plenty of runs scored yesterday as the Mets tried to keep up with the Red Sox in that early time slot as far as hitting 1 million home runs in the game, despite the tough park. Corbin Burns going for the Diamondbacks. Huascar Brazoban getting the start here for the Mets. Brazoban has not gone more than an inning since April 14th. The most he has pitched in a game this year is 2 1/3. He has not thrown more than 34 pitches, so we do not expect him to go deep into this game. He is opening and likely to be followed by Brandon Waddell, so nothing to really worry about from a pitching standpoint here. As you can see, we have him projected to go less than 2 innings. On the other side, Corbin Burns, 13% ownership, about a 16% chance of being optimal at 9K. Burns hasn't been great so far for Arizona, and we have seen a downtick in his strikeout numbers over the last couple of seasons, including last year when he was obviously still very, very good for Baltimore. 23% strikeout percentage, 3.6 xFIP. There are a lot of slates where you get a situation where Burns is a little bit more expensive than you would like because he's still a very good real life pitcher, but you can get more strikeout upside from other guys. That's not the case as much on this slate, just given the lack of pitching talent. So I do think that Burns looks pretty good at 9K, but keep in mind, it is a tough matchup for him. The Mets are a good offense. They have plenty of good hitters in this lineup. Their active roster against right-handed pitching ranks 19th in strikeout percentage since the start of last season. They have a 120 WRC plus. Obviously, that is driven in large part by Juan Soto, but it is a good lineup overall, having to deal with Nimmo, Alonso, Lindor, Vientos. Nimmo actually not in the lineup today, but Lindor, Alonso, Vientos, Marte, McNeil, Alvarez. Certainly not a bad lineup here, although it is a little bit weaker than usual since you don't have Nimmo. One other thing to point out with Burns is that he has always been bad at holding runners. So while I don't think that the Mets look great offensively, obviously given the matchup, I do think that it is kind of an interesting spot to look to in tournaments. You are going to get some ownership going in or coming into Burns, and you're not going to get much to the Mets. Francisco Lindor, 5% ownership. Pete Alonso, 5% ownership. Those are the highest marks on the Mets. So you can get a lot of talent in your lineup here at basically no ownership. Lindor showing up as optimal about 10% of the time, as is Alonso. Soto at about 11 or 12% at 5,200. We've seen his salary drop as a result of his slow start with the Mets. Mark Vientos getting 4% ownership, looking like he's optimal about 7% of the time. So I do think they look like a pretty interesting tournament stack. From a stolen base standpoint, Luis Angel Acuna, Starling Marte looking like the best stolen base options, the guys most likely to take advantage of that matchup against Burns. We know Francisco Lindor will run a bit too, though. Tyrone Taylor, you have a little bit of stolen base upside with Soto. So that is another way the Mets can get there. And it does kind of help to offset, this being a park that isn't great for hitting home runs. When you think about DFS upside, you do have a very good stolen base matchup. So if you get a situation where Burns just doesn't have his A game and he's putting guys on base, the Mets are likely to be able to rack up some fantasy points that way. On the other side, for the Diamondbacks, 7% projected ownership coming into Suarez and Corbin Carroll. They both look a little bit underowned with about 9 to 10% chance of being optimal for both of them. You can see a very high stolen base projection for Corbin Carroll here as well. About 5% or less projected ownership to the rest of the Diamondbacks, and that looks pretty much correct here. You could argue that I think Tim Tawa at 3,400 batting leadoff, Gabby Moreno batting 6th at 2,900, probably coming in a little bit underowned, but ownership mostly around where it should be. So ultimately, I think 2 secondary stacks again in this game, not an ideal spot for either offense, given that you're getting a quasi bullpen game from the Mets, and then you're getting Corbin Burns for the Diamondbacks. But I do like the stolen base upside and just raw talent in the Mets lineup at virtually no ownership on this slate. So I do think they're an interesting large field tournament spot. Milwaukee is taking on the White Sox in Chicago, about a 4.5 to 5 implied run total for the Brewers, about a 3.5 implied run total for the White Sox. Shane Smith coming in at 7K for the White Sox. Tobias Myers, 7,200 for the Brewers. Myers is getting about 19% ownership here, and I think it's mostly deserved. He has about a 14% chance of being optimal, which, again, just puts him right in the middle of that range of guys projected for 11 to 15 fantasy points. He is one of the pitchers that the field is likely to go to. Everybody likes taking pitchers against the White Sox, and it's going to be reflected here. But again, going a little bit overowned in one spot of your lineup is not a big deal. Tobias Myers is going to look like a good play here. 21.5% K percentage, 4.17 xFIP for him since the start of last season. 18.5% K percentage to lefties with a 160 expected ISO, 25% K percentage to righties with a 172 expected ISO. The White Sox lineup overall is pretty balanced. They have 5 lefties and 4 righties. But one thing that I would call attention to here is that they actually have 3 of their 4 righties in the top 5. So it is skewed a little bit in terms of the guys that Myers is going to face the most frequently. 2 right-handed bats where he does have that 25% strikeout percentage. So it's not to say that, you should prefer or that you love that he's going to face Luis Robert more than he's going to face Ben Baldwin, obviously. But you do get that platoon advantage for him in more of the bats that he's going to face most frequently. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Shane Smith at 7K, I think, is one of the pitchers that you can use as a contrarian play. He doesn't look as good as the popular pitchers. He doesn't look as good as Matthew Boyd. He doesn't look as good as Tobias Myers, but his range of outcomes isn't really that much worse. And he's just not going to get any ownership here. You're probably also going to get some ownership coming into the Brewers, so you can get some negative correlation that way. 20% strikeout percentage so far for Smith, 4.4 xFIP. Again, this is not me saying that I think Shane Smith is going to have a good game, predicting he's going to have a good game. It's simply saying that if you take Shane Smith's range of outcomes and how often he has a good game, and you compare it to the pitchers like Boyd, like Myers, that are getting the bulk of the ownership in this range, he is going to have a good game less often, but it's not by the margin that the field likely thinks it is. So you can use him to offset ownership elsewhere in your lineup if you need to, or just be a differentiation contrarian play when you're talking about trying to win these large, massive field, top-heavy tournaments. Myers is the priority of the 2 pitchers, though. Offensively, not surprisingly, there is more ownership coming into the Brewers, as you would expect. 4.5 to 5 implied run total there. We do not have a Milwaukee lineup yet, but William Contreras is projected for 12% ownership. He is getting the most hitter ownership in this game, followed by Bryce Turang and Christian Yelich at 11 and 10% respectively. Jackson Chourio getting about 9% as well. I think all 4 of those guys are slightly overowned, but nothing alarming in any of them. I think that they're all solid plays at their respective positions. We know that Bryce Turang gives you some stolen base upside as well. So does Jackson Chourio. None of them have huge stolen base projections here, though. Yelich can run a little bit, so can Frelick. But I think Milwaukee looks like a good stack, one that's probably going a little bit overowned in the aggregate, but still they project well. And in terms of chances of success, they are relatively high. And Jorge said Milwaukee lineup confirmed. I just refreshed and it's there now. Turang, Chourio, Yelich, Contreras, Frelick, Hoskins, Bowers, Ortiz, Durbin. The lineup that I had projected in, I think, is in. They look fine, but probably a little bit overowned. One way you can offset that, though, is just by going a little bit deeper into the lineup as well. Like, most of the ownership is coming into those top 4 spots. So if you just mix in an extra like Sal Frelick or Rhys Hoskins or something like that, you are going to offset the ownership there as well. As far as power numbers allowed this year for Shane Smith, I mentioned the strikeout numbers before at around 20%. 175 expected ISO to righties, only 109 to lefties so far. Strikeout percentage to lefties is about 7 points lower than it is to righties. 17% K percentage to lefties, actually has a 24% strikeout percentage against righties, but has been reverse splits in terms of power allowed. He does have a changeup. He's thrown 30% of the time to left-handed hitters. It hasn't been great at getting swings and misses, but it has been very good at limiting production, limiting power. So nothing super actionable about that, but something to keep in mind. And then finally, wrapping this one up with the A's taking on the Rangers in Texas. Nathan Eovaldi going for the Rangers. Luis Severino going for the A's. 2 of the better pitchers in terms of talent, at least on this slate. Eovaldi with the better strikeout matchup. He's getting 30% ownership at 9,200, 23% chance of being optimal. So just like I was saying with Sanchez, I think Eovaldi looks a little bit worse than Sanchez, but it is similar in that, yes, he's going a little bit overowned at 30%, but yes, he also has a 20 to 25% chance of being in the optimal lineup tonight. He's one of the highest probability plays on the slate. Obviously, 23% is still relatively low. 77% of the time, he is not going to be optimal. But again, you're not trying to make that perfect lineup. So it breaks down more to something like, 23% of the 20 to 25% of the time, he's going to be in the perfect lineup. And then, I don't know, 15 to 20% of the time, maybe even higher, he's going to be good enough that you can still win a tournament with him. And then the percentage of the time that my point here is the percentage of the time that he is not a guy that you can win a tournament with is much lower than the 77% that he is not actually technically perfect. So he overall looks good here. Severino getting 9% ownership. I think he should be a little bit higher at 12%, but nothing too crazy there. $8,000 price tag. So he is a little bit more expensive than some of these other pitchers that project similarly to him. But it is keeping the ownership in check. Again, you still do not have Corey Seager for Texas. You do have Jock Peterson in the lineup, which at some point might be a bad thing, but so far this year really has not. He has seemingly completely forgotten how to hit. So there's that as well. Since last season, 21.5% K percentage to righties, 20% to lefties for Severino. 160 expected ISO allowed to lefties, 117 to righties. The Rangers are running a predominantly right-handed heavy lineup out there, especially at the top. They have 4 total lefties, including switch hitters, but Jonah Heim and Leotis Taveras are both hitting 8 and 9. So you have 5 righties jammed into the top 7 here for the Rangers. That is something that makes Severino look a little bit better than he would if it were the opposite as well. Offensively here, not a ton of ownership coming in. The Rangers are obviously getting more than the A's are, as you would expect. Josh Smith getting the most ownership at about 10%. He looks like a good value here. He's $3,500. He is batting second. He has shortstop and outfield eligibility. If we sort hitters by fantasy points per dollar here, he actually shows up a little bit lower than I expected. We also didn't have this lineup, so we had him batting third. He looks a little bit better batting second, but he is a good point per dollar play. Most of Texas is a good point per dollar play. I'm kind of surprised they're not getting a little bit more ownership because of that. We saw them as massive chalk, especially in higher stakes, smaller field stuff yesterday. Obviously, that was a better matchup against Lopez, and they came through with like 15 runs. But given how inexpensive they are, I'm a little surprised they're not getting more ownership. But at the same time, optimal percentages aren't super high on them either. Josh Smith showing up 6% of the time. Langford 7% is the highest for Texas bats. Marcus Semien at about 5%. Only 2,800 batting fifth. Like, the matchup obviously isn't great, but this park is good for power upside. It's good for scoring runs. And this Texas offense is underpriced for their overall talent level, given the track record of hitting that most of the guys in this lineup have, even if they've been, a little bit slow to start the season. You do also have some stolen base upside here as well. Wyatt Langford generally will look to run a bit. You can see a 0.15 stolen base projection on him. Everybody else sub 10 or sub 0.1 for Texas, other than Taveras hitting ninth. But there are guys that will run a little bit. Garcia runs a little bit. Josh Smith can run a little bit. But Langford is your best bet for stolen bases. 4 home runs, Langford, Peterson, Berger are looking like your best bets here from Texas in terms of most likely to hit, not in terms of actual home run bets. I have no idea what their prices are. On the other side, for A's bats against Eovaldi, they are kind of similar to, I don't want to, not the Mets. I actually like the Mets more than the A's. They're similar to like the Pirates, I think, where nobody in this lineup is getting any ownership at all. And there is actually clearly upside in this lineup. Langoliers is one of the best power hitting catchers in baseball. He's 4,400. Lawrence Butler gives you some power and stolen base upside, except for he's not in the lineup. Oh, no, he's batting leadoff. I just overlooked him. He gives you power and stolen base upside. He's 5K. Rooker's 5,300. Soderstrom's 5K. So, like, those guys are expensive, but you do get some value with Nick Kurtz batting 6th at 3,500. Jacob Wilson batting 2nd at 4,100. JJ Bleday is down at the bottom of the order, but he's only 3,800. So I think the salaries are probably keeping the ownership down a bit as well. But again, you have a pitcher in Eovaldi that is a good pitcher. He's not elite, but he has actually allowed a 186 expected ISO to left-handed hitters since the start of last season. So I think that, if you wanted to, even if it's not full stack, but you wanted to get to some Butler, some Soderstrom, some Nick Kurtz, I think that's pretty appealing. And then obviously the righties, Rooker, Langoliers, Wilson, for different reasons, are solid hitters as well. So for a team getting no ownership in a park that is good for power, I do find them a little bit interesting. I do think they're going a little bit under-owned. But again, there were a few other stacks that I think the gap in ownership versus optimal percentage is a little bit bigger. Checking on chat, I've been contemplating for a few hours. Would you rather play the Cubs, Orioles, or Yankees in single entry? I mean, I think they're 3 of the best teams you can get to. As an Orioles fan, I would say probably the Yankees, just given how Orioles pitching has been so far this season. But yeah, I don't really think you can go wrong there. I will say it's a better home run park for the Orioles and Yankees than it is for the Cubs, but all these teams have similar implied run totals. So yeah, I think they're pretty close. I think I would prefer going to the Orioles-Yankees game just because of the park. But I actually, in terms of optimal percentage, was getting to more of the Cubs. So my brain says Orioles-Yankees. My computer says Cubs. Generally, computer is going to win out on that one. But really, I think you can kind of just pick whichever one you're most comfortable with. I think they're all about the same. So to recap, top pitching, Christopher Sanchez, Nathan Eovaldi, Drew Rasmussen. Top catchers, Carson Kelly. This is in terms of optimal percentage. Carson Kelly, William Contreras, Salvador Perez. In terms of ownership, William Contreras, Adley Rutschman, and Danny Jansen. Top first baseman, Pete Alonso, Bryce Harper, Michael Busch. In terms of ownership, it's Yandy Diaz, John Birdie, and Paul Goldschmidt. Second base, Nico Horner, Alex Bregman, Bryce Turang are the guys that look the best to me. For the field, it's Bregman, Turang, and Horner. At third base, getting to Rafael Devers, more John Birdie, Eugenio Suarez. For the field, pretty flat ownership here, but Yandy Diaz at the top, followed by Birdie and Bregman, who has MPE. So some MPE guys there at third base. Bobby Witt Jr., my favorite shortstop, if you can afford him. Dansby Swanson, Trevor Story are 2 and 3, followed by Lindor. So shortstop, I think, is a pretty solid place to be contrarian. You can either go to the more popular stacks, include Swanson and Story, but you can also include a low-owned Bobby Witt or a low-owned Francisco Lindor as ways to be contrarian, even if you are going to a popular Boston stack or a popular Cubs stack. That is one way you can be different without losing upside. And then in the outfield, Ian Happ, Kyle Tucker, Pete Crow Armstrong, Seiya Suzuki. Basically, if you play for the Cubs, you're one of my favorite outfielders. Juan Soto, Lars Nootbaar, Jarren Duran, following those guys up. For the field, it's Aaron Judge, Kyle Tucker, Ian Happ, Seiya Suzuki, Cedric Mullins. So again, I don't know. I'm hoping when I rerun everything that I am higher on this Orioles-Yankees game, because obviously I think Aaron Judge is fantastic here. I think Cedric Mullins is very good here. But for whatever reason, they didn't show up a ton in my run before the show. So I'm hoping they bounce back. But either way, obviously feel free to play those guys. As far as optimal stacks go, so again, this includes the pricing for the stacks. The most used 5-man stack for me was the Cubs, followed by, and that was by a pretty big margin. Then you get the Boston, Mets, Kansas City, Milwaukee, all looking really similar. Again, I don't know why New York and Baltimore didn't look better. I think it's likely they will by lock. So that wraps this one up. Thank you for checking out the show. John Carlson said, sorry, came late. Don't tell Noah Cameron. He's clearly mispriced. He projects very similarly to most other pitchers on this slate and is only $4,000. It's still, not an easy matchup. The Rays have an implied run total between 4.5 and 5. He's not safe, but the dude should be like 6,500 or something, and he's 4K. So clearly, I mean, he's the best point per dollar value. And from a projection standpoint, doesn't look that much worse than most other guys. So very clearly in the SP2 conversation today. So thanks for checking out the show. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button. That does help out a lot. Trying to get more views on this show, game the algorithm, all of that. Subscribe to the channel so you get notifications when shows go live. Thanks for checking out the show. Good luck on your lineups tonight. And don't forget the slate starts at 6:35 Eastern.